My name is Marianne Edmond. I am the chairperson for Up in PC. I'd like to welcome you all here this morning. So today our presentation is on the impact of gambling addiction. Our speaker is here. His bio is not in the booklet, so I'm going to read very quickly a little bit about him. It's a very short one, but that's okay. So Frank Lazzaro is our keynote speaker today. He has 16 years in the gambling recovery treatment field. He spent the past 4 years as a problem gambling prevention specialist for the Council on Compulsive Gambling of New Jersey, 800 Gambler, which was preceded by 2 decades in the accounting financial industry. So Frank, come on up. We're happy to have you. Please welcome Frank.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. I want to first of all thank Shireen for her efforts in making this happen. I'm not going to stand up here. We're going to go through these slides. I know there are copies in everyone's folder. I'd be remiss, first of all, at welcoming everybody. March is National Problem Gambling Awareness Month, and our slogan is, let's have the conversation. I can go in many different areas with this, and sometimes it's very difficult for me to stay focused, only in the respect that there's so much information I'd like to disseminate. I understand the coalition's mission, which is in the substance alcohol world. I understand that. And let me start by saying, one of the gentlemen made a statement about a safe bet. I want everyone to be perfectly clear. Our mission at the council is not about telling individuals to gamble or not to gamble. Our sole mission is to let the residents, individuals that live in the state of New Jersey know that there are resources available for that small percentage that do develop serious gambling disorders. The reality is 90% of the population are social recreational gamblers, and what that means is they have the ability to see it as a form of entertainment. Another 7 or 8% are classified or meet the criteria as problem gamblers, and there's that 2 to 3% that develop serious gambling disorders, where gambling becomes their drug. It becomes the most primary thing in their life, and hence leads us to our 1-hour presentation this morning on the impact of gambling. As I said, I'm not going to stand up here and read verbatim. I mentioned maybe in different terms, what our mission is, and I'm going to reiterate. What we are is a resource for individuals to reach out. Family members, the reality is about 3/4, 75% of the calls, the hits we get on our website are not from the individual who's developed a serious gambling disorder. It's from the family members, from the significant others, parents concerned about their adolescent children, parents concerned about mom and or dad. We plug into every population you can possibly think of, from the adolescents to the seniors and everything in between. I also heard someone mention something about social justice. We plug into that world. We plug in the criminal justice world, corrections. We run programs with the military, with the veterans, because the reality is it affects everyone. And again, I want to emphasize, most can do it on a recreational basis. It's that small percentage that do develop serious problems. 800 Gambler is a helpline hotline that was started by the council here in New Jersey approximately 30 years ago. The council itself has been in existence about 35 years. The joke in our office is, maybe I shouldn't say this since I'm on camera, but it's okay. I like to keep it light. We're the best kept secret in the state. Gambling permeates, not in a negative way, our society. It predates everything that we see in our society. It's been around for a long time. Real brief, in the archaeological world, when they whatever they do, they have find, when they go through and they find ruins, etc., they find things that I guess the equivalent of thousands of years ago were dice, etc. We'll talk briefly about the types of gamblers, social gamblers. As I mentioned, you can read it for yourself. Those are the 90%. The problem gamblers are that 7 to 8%. There is a debate going on in our field about maybe these percentages need to be tweaked a little bit. I didn't put this in the presentation, but those that may know, Dr. Leah Nauer does a lot of research in the gambling world, and she's affiliated with Rutgers. She's a researcher. I don't know exactly her credentials. She recently, within the last year or so, maybe two, came out with some new research, some new data that suggests the disordered gambler numbers are more possibly in the 4 to 6% range. You know, and I've heard fluctuations about that. But pretty much consistently, globally, in whichever population you're talking about, it's that 2 to 3% that seems to be a common theme. Disordered gamblers. Phases of compulsive gambling. There's the winning phase. You know, and I'd like to make this interactive. If you folks have any questions, please, I'd like to go that route. As I said, let's have the conversation. Please raise your hand. I'll address it to the best of my ability. And it wouldn't be the first time that I mention something that individuals either have some questions on or just flat out say, Frank, you know, I don't necessarily agree with that. I'm not shy. I've been ducking rocks for a long time. You know, the losing phase, prolonged losing and chasing of losses, starts lying about gambling, personality changes, starts to borrow. You know, a lot of this has to do with the comorbidity, the co-occurring that exists between addictions. It's very rare in my experience. I'm not a clinician, because I chose not to go that route, that individuals that are diagnosed or meet the criteria established by the DSM-5, and for those, make, again, an assumption that most in the room have an understanding of the DSM-5. The most recent version was released, I think, about 5 or 6 years ago, give or take, in that general period, where gambling was elevated to disorder into the same category as substances, alcohol, etc. Has that gained more traction? We're not exactly sure. But we do see a greater understanding, hence just the coalition here in Passaic County seeing the value. And again, I thank you folks for allowing me the opportunity this morning just to share some information. Because gambling is something that is not necessarily on the forefront of people's minds until they start to develop serious issues, until it starts to drive criminality, until it starts to drive homelessness. Someone had mentioned to me, I was doing a presentation at an inpatient program, actually out in Sunrise, to their inpatients yesterday morning, and the gentleman was talking about living out of his van along the river. My response to that was, generally an individual that's a disordered gambler might be in the same boat, but they're probably not living out of their van, they're camping out because the van has already been sold. The desperation phase, constant bailouts, increase in debts, more time spent with gambling, remorse, isolation, as I mentioned, illegal activity, criminality, maladaptive, impaired thinking, physical symptoms of gambling. And I'm going to spend a few moments on this because I get this quite a bit. I think most of us have an understanding, and I look at it this way, and I'll try to break it down in the simplest forms. Those that develop serious disorders in the substance and alcohol world, I look at it like this. How much can you consume? How much can you ingest before you pass out? Hopefully wake up the next morning. I mean, I am aware of what's going on, and it does pain me with this whole opioid crisis and the thousands that are dying behind it. Gambling works a little bit differently. You can stay at it much longer. Hence the correlation that's been made with technology and modern medicine being what it is. Research is proven, and please don't accept anything that Frank says as face value. You can do your own research. But most in the room have seen brain scans in magazines and textbooks and how they color code them, the different colors and stuff. What they discovered, real stimulants, specifically cocaine. An individual that's has a cocaine addiction and those that have serious gambling disorder, the reaction or the part of the brain that lights up in those scans is almost identical. Almost to the point where the researchers in the medical world could not identify whom was who or who was whom. As I said, I'm not going to read because I'd like to get the The psychological dependency and irrational belief in and reliance on risk-taking behavior associated with gambling to achieve welcome changes in one's mood and feeling states. Does that sound familiar? Outside of the gambling world. Hence, the co-occurring that exists. I didn't put in all the statistics because an hour sometimes is very short, but there's a very high correlation between substances. The highest correlation for those that develop serious gambling disorders that meet the criteria are with tobacco, with nicotine, almost 76%. And this is information that was put out by SAMHSA. These are not numbers that we are putting up. As I said, I'm not going to sit here, regurgitate, and bore you people. Any information that you like, my business cards are there. We'd be more than happy. Although I have a sense already by just perusing the room, I see people nodding their head that this is, which I'm grateful is not new information, that it's out there. But gambling is viewed a little bit differently than most of the other things that we see in our society. And maybe it's because, as I said, and that's how it should be. Until you develop the problem, you don't see gambling as a problem. And as I mentioned, most of the calls and hits we get on our website and on our hotline are from not the person that develops the problem. And we also, I take this as grateful, I should also put this out there. By legislation in the state of New Jersey, any advertising that's done by the legal gaming industry in the state of New Jersey, and actually I need to take that back, by the gambling industry, and it reminds me because I had a brief conversation and I was waiting to start the presentation. The reason I say I have to be very careful how I use the words is because traditionally we refer to gambling as gaming. But now with the advent of the explosion, we live in a very technological world. What's happening in the video gambling world, the video gaming world, where they have now put a gambling component to it, loot boxes, skins. I come from a different generation. I could not understand, so I had to educate myself, why this virtual weapon, whether it's a gun, a knife, has more value if it's red, green, blue, or purple, is more valuable. I could not understand. But apparently those in that world, that video game, and again, it's a concern with our adolescents. It's not saying that they shouldn't video game, but you have to be mindful. And the industry itself, overnight, has developed into a $2 billion industry. I know, just to correlate, we were talking about, as I heard some of the earlier presenters sharing some of their information about what potentially legalized marijuana would look in the state of New Jersey. Well, in the gambling world, for those that may not have heard, we are looking at potentially what legalized sports betting in the state of New Jersey is going to look like. And that came about. New Jersey's been trying to legalize sports betting now for several years. And they did whatever they needed to do at the state level, put it to the voters. The voters said yes, changed the state constitution, and when they were ready to go, there was constantly lawsuits by the professional sports league and the NCAA that would challenge it, and lower courts would deny New Jersey the ability to allow legalized sports betting. Ultimately, it was taken to the Supreme Court in New Jersey back in December. The jurists, the Supreme Court judges, heard the case and should be rendering the decision almost any day now, sometime this month, maybe next month. And all indications are from those legal experts is just by the questions the jurists were asking the Solicitor General and the gentleman that represented New Jersey, that there's a possibility it could be legalized. So hence my comment about, you know, the correlations between what legalization of marijuana would look like, hence what is the legalization of sports betting going to look like. New Jersey has established a mechanism where if they are allowed, there'll be gambling parlors in the brick and mortar casinos in Atlantic City, and there'll be gambling parlors put in the racetracks, those few remaining, the Meadowlands, Monmouth Park, where you can legally go in, similar to Las Vegas, in the state of Nevada, and wager on sporting events. Again, we don't have an opinion for or against. We're not pro or con. Our concern is the continually expansion of gambling. Does that potentially correlate to the population, those numbers increasing? Does that 2 to 3% now go to a larger number? So what we do is we advocate, not myself personally, our executive director, that some consumer protection needs to be put into place. And obviously the funding stream is also a concern. I heard individuals speak about grants. You know, this one is interesting. because I would be remiss. We all know what time of the year is it, March Madness, the beginning of this men's college basketball tournament, which for the most part, give or take a couple of days, spans 3 weeks. I believe it started 3 days ago on Tuesday with some playing games, and it ends on a Monday evening with the championship game. The estimates are that this single college basketball men's tournament, there will be $10 billion wagered. That is not to suggest that most of those people probably don't have a problem. My understanding is, well, I've known this for a while, this is one of Las Vegas's busiest weekends. A lot of people make the junkets, they go out because of the myriads of games, they have the opportunity to wager responsibly, hopefully, and just have a good time with it and avail themselves maybe to a brief vacation, etc. Our concern is for those that cross that threshold where all of a sudden you are now pursuing it. Again, I'm not necessarily talking about things that are part of the presentation or the PowerPoint, but there has been research done about lost productivity during this time. People sitting at their desks at work, and a lot of it because of technology. Yesterday, today, I think the games yesterday and today start at like 12 noon or something like that and go to like 12 midnight. So while they're sitting at their desks and have their laptop, their devices, their work computers, they're streaming the games online. I know people talk about multitasking. I personally believe that's a fallacy. Maybe only because Frank can't do that, but we'll leave that alone. And they put dollar amounts to it. That's how they actually do it. I'm not sure. It's not my area, but they estimate that the loss of productivity is millions and billions of dollars. Yes.
But that's perfectly legal. Yes or no?
Doing what?
Betting for the basketball. It's usually
No. By definition, those brackets that you fill out, there's nothing wrong with filling out the brackets, because on Monday morning, every publication, whether it's the print media, whether you got it offline, you had the brackets. I actually saw a piece on the news last night. I think it was the team from Chicago, Loyola of Chicago, which I think is a Catholic Christian university. I don't know what, but there was this a sister who was 93 years old. She claimed she filled out the bracket, but she wasn't in the pool, which indicated to me she didn't put any money in, whether it's $1 or $2. But by definition, those are illegal. And I've been asked a question, if I may. I see the gentleman, law enforcement here. Does law enforcement have better things to do with their time than to worry about? I did a presentation about 2 years ago at a high school in Bergen County. And there was a young lady there. She was now a senior. She raised her hand and she said, "Frank, when I was a freshman, I won the pool. The buy-in was like $1 or $2. And she said she won $1,200. I was like, wow. I said, "Can I ask you a question?" She says, "Yes." I said, "You have knowledge of this?" She said, "No, I just looked at the mascots and the colors, and I just did eeny, meeny, miny, mo." I'm sorry.
I also just saw recently on the news, and I might be mistaken, that some companies are offering employees big money if they get the 16 teams or whatever. I don't even know. So I'm assuming that is illegal as well.
Well, that's the slippery slope, because as long as you're not, by definition, as long as you're not putting up something of value in the hopes of getting something back of value, then potentially it's not gambling, and the illegality and legal part of it becomes different. What you're referring to, I think it's Warren Buffett from Berkshire Hathaway, has done that with his employees. And that's a fairly large, Warren Buffett, as we know, has been very successful investor, worth gazillions of dollars. So they just fill it out, and the employee gets the perfect bracket, I think, as you mentioned, wins $1 million. By definition, raffles are gambling.
I have a license.
Well, that's the key, right? You got a license from the state of New Jersey. We know many religious institutions use raffle organizations in the substance world. We have this debate. I don't have a problem with it. We understand why they're doing it. They're doing it to raise funds, dollars for a worthy cause, to help their parishioners, help their clients, help their patients, help the community. Where law enforcement becomes really concerned is where you're running these pools and you are taking a percentage for the house. where you're taking a,
Ball pools that we get in every year for the Super Bowl, where we buy a box.
those are by definition illegal also. And I'm going to illustrate that. Thank you for asking me that. Again, another presentation. It's amazing what the adolescents know. They've educated me quite a bit. Or things that I know, but when I hear it almost from the mouth of babes, a young lady who said, Mom and Dad own a bar. And around the Super Bowl time, they always do the boxes. But she said she couldn't understand. Her question to me was, when local law enforcement comes in, to have some dinner or whatever, a beverage, they always turn the board around, she said. And she couldn't understand why. And I gave her the same explanation, because by definition, now if the local bar is doing it where they're not taking the cut off the top, a percentage, I don't think law enforcement is going to be concerned.
They would have to be licensed, or no?
Well, there's no way to get a license for something that's illegal, by definition.
Taking the proceeds and donating it to a charity or whatever, no, that doesn't count either.
No. I mean, is that a mitigating circumstance? I've developed little pieces of information over the year and knowledge from the law enforcement world, from the courts, from prosecutors, etc. They have a lot of things on their plate that they have to attend to. And I'm going to be perfectly honest. Regardless of what our walk of life, we're a human being. So we're going to gamble. We're going to, put a few dollars on the game. But sports betting is, by definition, is illegal. But I get a lot of people that say, just because the masses are doing it, we fall into the trap. Well, how bad can this be? The thought about illegality doesn't necessarily even cross their minds. Just because they're doing it online, most of them don't even realize that they're doing business with these online offshore accounts, since it's illegal in the United States at any level for sports betting. Now, 3 states, possibly 4 now, Pennsylvania, New Jersey became the 3rd state to legalize online casino gambling. So now all we need to do is pull out a device, use your laptop, whatever. You can play the same exact games online, virtually, that you can. And we've all seen the commercials. But this is what's driving it. My children, who are young adults in their early 30s, don't see the value of sitting down at whatever the game of choice is at the brick and mortar casinos. But you give them a device and they can do stuff online. That's what their preference is. And research is proving this. This is what the world is. And again, this is what the concern is with the video gaming world is. And when you talk, since I mentioned the thing about sports betting, the estimates are that the sports betting industry in the United States, legal or illegal, and there's only about 3% that's legal, predominantly most of it taking place in the state of Nevada, is a $150 billion industry. And I like to be as honest as I can and not to put out misinformation, but that ties directly into, this is where Frank gets themselves in trouble. Why is there this push? I'm not making commentary. Should marijuana be legalized or not? But I only can come to one conclusion. Maybe, as you mentioned when you were kind enough to read my bio, that I equate, since I spent my early career in the financial world, I equate everything in those terms. Even with Atlantic City, with the woes that they have. Well, if there's no competition, you're the only game in town, it's almost a monopoly. And it wasn't that long ago, 3-4 decades, all there was Las Vegas and Atlantic City in the 70s. Now, today, there are casinos in 40 states. Either state-sanctioned, which is what Atlantic City is, and Las Vegas, and I say this with the utmost respect, the whole Indian Nation and the tribes that fall under that on their land they have built casinos, etc. The only reason I bring this up because these are just, when you talk about gambling, they're multi-billion-dollar industries. Even this whole phenomenon of video gaming, which has been around for a while. Again, my adult children who are in their 30s, I know they video game, but for them it's just as a sidebar. My son is an attorney. He's a prosecutor, not in the state of New Jersey, in a different state. But as a form of recreation, as a form just to unwind, because this is what he grew up with. He grew up during the days of, the Mario Brothers and PlayStations and Xbox. I grew up in an urban community in the Bronx. That stuff didn't exist. I had a conversation with a couple. I have this joint awe and, with this whole thing of social media. I just have difficulties grasping it. It seems like you have another question?
Well, yeah, you can see my head going.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
sorry,
fine.
I've been monopolizing the whole thing. The video gaming that our kids are doing, I don't see, how is that gambling? Do they bet on them? How does that work?
Well, it's not in the sense of traditional gambling. I mentioned skins, and what skins are, it's just they change the color of their virtual weapon, whether it's this assault weapon virtually or it's a knife. And as I said, I don't understand why, but apparently it is. If the gun or the knife is a different color, there's more value. Well, how do you get that skin? You have to pay for it. You click on it. So by definition, what you're doing is you're putting something up of value, but there is no guarantee you're going to get that yellow knife that you're looking for.
So they're not putting up money per se.
No, they are putting up money per se.
So how does a kid put up money? With a credit card?
Yes.
What kid? All right, never mind.
Well, no, you're asking the question. Most of the time, quite honestly, it's because mom and dad are saying, here's the credit card, you know, it only costs $20, but we are seeing adolescents, 15, 16-year-olds, seeking treatment, that they got to hold the mom's or dad's credit card. Most of the time it's because mom or dad had given them the card, or grandma and grandpa, or whoever it may be. And this is one case that I'm aware of. This young man, an adolescent, wound up charging up to $10,000.
Electronic gift certificates too.
Yes, all of those things. You know, I'm going to give you another analogy. During the holiday season, which is a few months that have passed, a few months ago, it's very common what we see is grandma, grandpa, maybe they live far away, they send a card, and they put scratch-offs in the card. We caution against that. I see the gentleman laughing. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but you have to be mindful. I'm going to put this out there. Why? Yes, I understand to see your grandson or granddaughter that's 4 or 5 years old scratching off and how excited they get. First of all, they shouldn't be doing it because it's illegal because they're underage. Alcohol is a legal substance. Tobacco is a legal substance. How come it's not so cute to put a shot glass and a cigarette in their hand? You understand? Yes.
Frank, that was my question for you. Have you seen or have you guys at the 1-800-GAMBLER received phone calls from families that have children that are already, demonstrating symptoms of addiction through gambling? Because as we know, Asia already has rehabs just for fifth graders. Have we seen that issue statewide here in New Jersey? Where kids need rehab and we don't have it for them.
Right, we are starting to see some calls coming in because there is this information that is going out. I'm not saying necessarily from our organization because this is a whole new arena, and we have the same dilemma. Who are we referring to? There are not, to the best of my knowledge, and I'm going to defer because there's experts in the room that have their certification, but there are not, I understand there are many that have their credentials, LCACDs, LPCs, CADCs. Most of society, let me address it this way, if you would ask them if a family member, significant other, anybody would develop a problem with drugs, or just as they all have an understanding there are resources available. But there are many that don't understand or have an understanding there are resources available. What we do is, at the council, we've partnered with providers throughout the state that have obtained their credentials. I had the pleasure of having a brief conversation with this nice woman here. We do trainings, 30-hour trainings, which is the educational component of those that want to get their gambling certification. Then there's a supervision component, as we know, that's just how it is, and you sit for the exam, et cetera. We're right now in the middle. I think we generally do it in March to coincide with National Problem Gambling Awareness Month. We've partnered with Phoenix Rising Consulting Center in Irvington. Last March, I spearheaded one in Hudson County with the coalition there. Maybe in the future, maybe next March, we'll do something with, because I see you have the technology, you have the space. Maybe we can do something here in Passaic County. 2 years ago, we partnered with Seabrook out in Morris County in their facility. And basically what that means by partner, they provide the facility, we provide the trainers going forward.
I'm sorry, Frank, but do you have anything in your data showing numbers in regards to the youth having this issue?
It's easily obtainable. We can get that information. I mentioned about the DSM. Our understanding is that whenever the next version of the DSM comes out, they're looking at video gaming as a potential disorder, as one of the ones they're looking at. I had the privilege of attending a World Health Organization conference in February that was hosted in Columbia University. It was called Own Your Health, and it was briefly touched on that because the World Health Organization is recognizing potentially video gaming is a major problem. There's a lot of literature now coming out, just the actual nature of the devices being addictive. I'm amazed. When I was in Manhattan at this conference, and it was uptown, Columbia University, if those are like 115th Street and Broadway or whatever, I'm surprised there's not more fatalities. Everyone's walking like this. And I guess to tie that in, it's the same mindset of the person that develops the gambling problem. It consumes you. It's all consuming. I'm not going to stay up to 2 a.m. to worry about who likes me and who doesn't. I don't even do the social media thing. I have enough time keeping up with the emails, etc. And as I said, this all has value. I might not be following script, but you have the information, and you can always contact me. And sometimes I have difficulty. Do I go with that? Do I talk about fantasy gaming? Is that the presentation? I know Dan, who's on my immediate supervisor, executive director, most in the room may have met Dan Trillar already. Dan's probably about 2 decades, and I say this, younger than I am, and I say, boy, you have to slow down. I can't keep up with you. But it's how he is, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for almost everything that we do. But that is a big concern. Sir?
Or just a point on the whole, gaming thing is there are the virtual slot machines. You don't even actually win money, but then if you run out of coins, you can buy more coins. So it's not technically gambling, but you're still spending money on something that is virtual gambling kind of.
Right. And again, this is why I want to question and thank you. Just by definition, we've tweaked it a little bit, is where you're putting something up of value, even to get those coins. Somehow there's an economic cost to it. There's an economic component. Some of the brick and mortar casinos in Atlantic City have these machines that look like slot machines, but what they are is you're sitting down and you're playing a video game, and you wager X number of dollars that you're going to kill so many good guys, bad guys, bots in a prescribed period of time. These are actual games that are out there. Something that's fairly new is called loot boxes, L-O-O-T. Loot, which for me, historically, that's, loot meant cash, right? And again, it's the same concept. And they're embedded in these games. I've heard people that tell me I don't do it, so, the FIFA game, which is, the real soccer game or whatever, the real football, I should say, or the Madden game, which is the American football. They have these things in there. Again, it's not gambling in the sense where they're going to go and they're going to play roulette, although there are some games that are out there called CSGO Lotto, where there is a link to do something more fast-paced with roulette, with the spin of the wheel and all this other stuff. Again, it deals with the neuroscience of the brain, which I alluded to earlier about the correlation between cocaine and gambling. Was there other questions? I guess I should keep track of time. Oh, we're good. The mental obsession. To me, I always come down to it talks about the preoccupation, where it becomes the most important thing in your life. And again, the correlation and the co-occurring that exists with addiction. I have been asked questions because of the works that we do. It was an inpatient program probably about a year ago, long-term, I think it was in Hunterdon or Warren County. It was a 6-month program, and this gentleman raised his hand and he said, Frank, I need to ask you a question. He said, by his own admission, he had a serious heroin addiction. And I know addiction itself, we're being cautioned to maybe move away from that because a lot of people feel they're stigmatized by it. But the reality is, my experience is that once a person wants to get help, has to want to get help, I should say. We can play semantics all we want. Is it a crutch or is it not? I'm interjecting some of my own personal beliefs, but I think that they're fairly accurate. So this gentleman was saying, he's saying that the question was, being an admitted heroin addict, that the rush that he was receiving just by doing all the activities leading up, whether it was who he was going to get the money from, whether he was going to take it out of savings, steal the money, whatever it was, find out who had the best product, because it's always about the high. And the analogy in the gambling world, after a while, that $50 bet is not cutting it anymore, so you have to step it up to 100, 200. And the tolerance, you develop a tolerance, so you have to take it to the next level. Ultimately, the question was, and in his own words, the rush that he was receiving from all the activities until he actually scored the drug of his choice, in his case was heroin, was greater until he actually used. He's saying, is your experience in the gambling world, for those developed serious gambling laws, it's similar? I said yes, because it is. A lot of people view gambling as they should, but even those that develop problems as social, very social beings. Yes, you might be sitting in a casino surrounded by thousands of people. Those are strangers, you don't know them. After a while, when you develop that, it might start out as being social. You're going with your significant other, you're going with your brother-in-law, you're going with mom and dad, you're taking grandma and grandpa on a yearly excursion to have a little fun, nothing wrong with that. But once you cross that threshold and it becomes the predominant force in your life, you're not bringing the people that you know anymore. You're not bringing your significant other, because they're going to be chirping in your ear, or you have to stop, let's do something else. We came down for the show started a half an hour ago, yeah, I'll be there in a minute. All of those things. I see that nice woman nodding her head. And there is knowledge, but and it's until you think about it or you hear someone talking about it, and how do we address it, we're not really sure. And again, our sole purpose, and I'm reinforcing this for a reason, is just to make the populations we plug into. As a matter of fact, I'm going to dub all of you now our ambassadors, for no other reason than if you encounter someone in your practices, in your agencies, in the work that you do that develop serious gambling disorders, all you need to do is call 800-GAMBLE, and we're going to do the best we can in our ability to get treatment and help for those individuals. In addition to treatment, we feel very strongly that individuals get involved with the 12-step fellowship of Gamblers Anonymous. I know I'm jumping the gun here. I've heard all kinds of things. Oh no, I can't go to those meetings because all they do is talk about their gambling experience, which just gives me the urges I want to go back to gamble. All right, what about the treatment side? Yeah, that's one-on-one more effective. As long as you're getting the help, that's the bottom line. This ties into about stepping up, about the tolerance levels. Initially, an intense high, a sense of excitement, a state of feeling great. Let me ask this question. An individual has a serious gambling disorder, and whatever their form of gambling is, I've been talking about the casinos. I'm also aware of the illegal casinos. In many of the urban communities, or many communities, they have the local gambling spots that law enforcement is aware of and does the best of their ability to shut them down. And it's amazing. What amazes me is everyone knows about them. And again, a lot of them just think that this is normal because they grew up in it. This is the environment that they know, and there's nothing wrong with it. But if you're on a winning streak and you try to leave, you think they're going to willingly let you go with their money? And this ties in with the violence. Occasionally we'll hear stories. Recently there was a story down in the Trenton area where some individual walked into one of these illegal gambling spots, had a run of success, was up, they didn't quote the dollar amount, and once he left the establishment, he was shot. These are the outcomes. The work that we do in the correctional system. We see it all the time. They say, Frank, why do you and your colleagues go into the correctional system? Because we have many concerns. Those potentially that are coming into that environment, potentially with I'm not naive, we'll say gambling, even though it's not condoned, is the easiest thing to do, as long as nothing jumps off. I'm not saying the other stuff doesn't happen. I'm going to leave that alone. I've seen a lot of things. Sir?
I was taking it back when we were talking about the little after-hour joints where they're gambling and stuff. And my flashback was there used to be a place in Patterson, I think it was called the Night Spy, where folks used to go and do just that after hours whenever they gamble and do all the other things that they do.
Can I ask you a question, sir? What was your feelings about it? Was it almost like normalized that this is just what happened in the neighborhood?
I really didn't give it much thought. I mean, I heard about it, and I wasn't really into that.
Okay.
I know folks who did, and
Right.
they didn't stop to think about, how that impacted me, how I felt about it.
Okay. Yeah, and again, that just reinforces, and thank you, that until everyone in this room, and we don't have that kind of time, I'm sure has some kind of experience, whether the experience you just shared back in the day, they still exist. They still exist. But there's also other things that are taking place there also, which ties into co-occurring. You know, they're offering, and again, it's not criticism. First of all, I'm not criticizing the legalized gaming industry in the state of New Jersey. I should mention also there are 38 councils, our brothers and sister councils throughout the country. For example, Pennsylvania calls themselves the Council on Compulsive Gambling in Pennsylvania. New York has tweeted their name a little bit. They call themselves the New York Council on Problem Gambling. And there's a national council in Washington, D.C. You know, right now, the National Council is really all over this whole thing with the legalization potentially of sports betting. And there's a lot of states now that are going through the legislative process to put the mechanisms in place so that if, in fact, a favorable decision comes down, and we're not sure exactly what it might look like, but potentially there's a federal law that was put into place in 1992 which banned sports betting except in a few designated spots in the country. Predominantly, I'll say there's 4 states that have legalized sports gambling: Nevada, Delaware, Montana, and Oregon. But Nevada is pretty much the only spot where you can actually walk into the gambling parlor, put down $100 or $5, whatever it may be, that this team is going to beat that team, and you collect your money. All the other states have some variations. I'm not here to get into all of that. Yes?
I guess I'm a little confused, like when you're talking about this legislation that's going to be coming down, like New York has off-track betting, right?
Okay.
Is that what you're talking about in
No.
New Jersey? I'm like a little confused.
There's a distinction between the horse races, which has been legal for a while almost everywhere, and sports betting on sporting events.
Oh.
Football, soccer, hockey, baseball. And again, this is where Frank doesn't know how to keep his mouth shut, but there's a hypocrisy, the way I see it. And National Hockey League, who is opposed, one of the leagues that is opposed to New Jersey legalizing sports betting, and again, not a statement for or against, but yet they have an expansion team in Las Vegas now. They call them the Vegas Knights, which is a sidebar here. They're doing very well. I'm not too sure about that. The Oakland Raiders, a professional NFL team, is already given indications they're going to move to Las Vegas. They're just waiting for a statement to be built.
So in Nevada, this is already legal?
Nevada is a very unique state. Alcohol has been legal throughout the country since Prohibition. Nevada is one of those 8 or 9 states that have legalized marijuana for recreational purposes. Nevada has legalized sports betting. And these are issues that they're trying to grapple with. They've been trying to grapple with for years, with alcohol being a legal substance. Again, not a criticism, but yet for those that have been to the brick and mortar casino, you walk in, within a few minutes, you sit down, whatever at your game of choice, what happens? They come around offering you the proverbial free drink. I guess you could get a cup of coffee, but most people aren't doing that. I saw another hand somewhere.
Yeah, right here.
Yes.
I actually work for St. County Probation, so we work with defendants that come in. If we suspect that this defendant has like a gambling problem, who could I have them evaluated by? Do I call 1-800?
Yes.
Okay.
We do evaluations. Our goal is, and we've had some success. For example, I want to mention Seabrook. I know Seabrook, as part of their intake, and there are many others in the state, that part of their intake process, they do ask a few gambling questions as part of their intake. And based on that assessment, again, some of the staff at Seabrook I know have their credentials, the official credential, the acronym is ICGC, International Gambling, Compulsive Gambling Counselor, or something like that. I should know this. I do, but yes, exactly. I would never, ever suggest, and it ties into the criminality, that just because you have a disorder, you have a serious gambling disorder, that justifies criminality. Maybe it's a mitigating factor, and maybe just because of the work that I do, and I've been tuned into this for a long time, it's almost every day. Maybe I'm exaggerating, that you pick up the print media, you get it through social media, you hear a story of someone being arrested, and there's always a embezzling component to it, or there's a burglary, and further investigation determines that there's a gambling problem there, which drove the criminality. You know, something that just popped into my head, and again, this is around the world. Actually, a lot of the research is coming out from outside of the United States. I'm almost hesitant, but I'm going to share this also with Narcan. I saw on one of the slides earlier, before I had the pleasure of standing up here, about the nasal spray. I don't recall which, but I know it's one of the Scandinavian countries. I don't know if it's Finland, Norway. They're doing some research, the medical, potentially developing a nasal spray that would, similar to Narcan, would it block however the brain works for those that develop serious gambling disorders. I don't know exactly how I feel about that. Conversely, though, individuals that have been taking medication specifically for Parkinson, that never really even gambled socially at all, are now developing urges to go gamble. So the correlation between the medication doing something in the brain that's causing these feelings to go out and gamble. Yes?
Yeah, I guess my question, talking about the prevention side, or even, the prevention side, if there's anything that you know, especially with like the computers, anything that you could put in place, a program, a chip, something that, in order for that, whoever's going to use the technology not to gamble, if there's anything that can prevent, that you can do for your family to put something,
You're talking about a block?
Yeah, to
Yes.
block those gambling sites.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Can you please talk about that?
Okay, can't give you the specifics. It's easy enough to look up. Well, in the legalized gambling world, through the Division of Gaming Enforcement in the state of New Jersey, you can self-exclude yourself, both from the casinos and both from the online legalized version, where you will not be able to. And there's a lot of question, how do you know it's the individual? But it also ties into the questions about how they're getting the money, the credit cards. I'm not suggesting it's the adolescents that are doing it. And one of the things, myself and the doctor, I've had the pleasure of meeting him several times at various meetings, networking events, and I know he's, and I'm grateful. I thank for your efforts and the work that you do. But about, exposure early on, early onset to whatever it may be, substances, gambling. Research has proven it increases the human being's chances exponentially of developing a problem later in life. And as I started to say earlier, as opposed to substances and alcohol, how much can you consume until you pass out, hopefully wake up and you're at it again, whereas gambling, you stay at it much longer. Even I'll equate it to the video gaming world. There's a lot of talk now, maybe not even the video gaming, about these devices, kids staying up to all hours at night, being sleep deprived because they have to check their lights and likes and stuff. I'm hearing things like they're paying their buddies, they have a rotation, a schedule, where if it's your given night, they give you the password and you check my account. Again, there's a correlation. It's not gambling in a traditional sense, but it's information that needs to be put out there. And for a variety of reasons, we're seeing issues of, we just recently got a call from a high school down in Monmouth County that one of our colleagues are in the process, or probably already started a program down there, where a young man, historically, I don't know if he was an only child or not, but mom and dad would go to work, and shortly thereafter, this young man would go to school. After a while, mom and dad were getting notices from the courts. There was a truancy issue. He wasn't going to school anymore. It was more important to stay home and play video games than go to school. These are the dangers. To the best of my knowledge, in the state of New Jersey, United States, and probably most countries in the world, you have to go to school up to a certain age. This is the driving force. But the underlying mindset that we see, I think, is almost identical to the more traditional gambling world. Even I talked about these all illegal offshore sites. Even the world that people that do know about traditional bookmakers, they have changed. It used to be where you would pick up the phone, or what's the line on the game, I want the Giants to do this, that, and the other thing. They don't do that anymore. They've partnered with these offshore sites and act as the conduit for the exchange of cash. Because a lot of people are very uncomfortable still, maybe because of the whole identity theft that goes on and the whole cyber world, which just reminds me, don't really like to use their credit card or their debit cards. We suggest leave your plastic at home if you're going to take the trip down to the casino. I'm going to say Atlantic City, but the reality is from where we're standing here today, there are casinos much closer in Pennsylvania, in New York, whether they're virtual, etc. I sort of touched on this. Higher gambling rates in addicted populations, higher drug and alcohol rates and pathological gamblers, switching of addictions. We also see a lot of transferring of addiction. Real quick, I'm going to share a story. A young lady, to me, everybody's young. In her late 30s now, by her own admission, has been clean and sober. She developed a serious crack cocaine issue and also had a problem with alcohol. Was clean and sober for 10 years. Developed a serious gambling addiction. She transferred her gambling because the underlying issue that ties addiction together, aside from early onset potential trauma in the household, sometimes innocuous, sometimes is abuse, whatever it may be, is, what was I saying? The underlying component is an emotional component. I know when you think about gambling, what society thinks about gambling, whether you have a problem, you don't have a problem, you're just on a losing streak and things are going to change, that there's a money component to it. But that's not what the issue is. The underlying issue is an emotional component. What drives that emotional component? Is it trauma? There's a lot of research on trauma-informed care. Getting to the underlying, I can't even imagine. I just saw a piece, I think it was on 60 Minutes this past Sunday night, and they were talking about trauma-informed care. And there was this young woman who was just abused, sexually abused, from 4 years old to 14 years old. I can't even get my head around what that means. But and then it manifests itself into anger issues, all kind of other, and not being able to function in society at some level. And these are all, I have never met, I'm of the belief, nothing is singular. What I mean by that, nothing stands alone. It is very rare, to me, in my experience, I have never met an individual that develops a serious gambling disorder and doesn't have a problem with a substance, regardless of what that substance may be, or typically addicted, etc., or there's some family trauma, whatever it may be. So I started to say, she admitted she was clean and sober for 10 years. To the best of my knowledge, she still is clean and sober from those substances. She admitted, I'm going to say at least since of legal age, she was going to the casino recreationally, first with her parents, then with her boyfriend. She transferred her addiction to the point where until she recognized she had a problem, she was 4 months behind in the rent, facing eviction, until she reached out. And she said if she wouldn't have had the issues with the other substances that I mentioned, she probably wouldn't even have known that services potentially would have been available. And now she's getting the services that she needs, which we're grateful for. But now she's got this triplicate thing going on: substances, alcohol, and a serious gambling disorder. I get this quite a bit about triggers. And to me it makes perfect sense. And I see some people nodding their head, so I'm going to take that as being in agreement. Is alcohol a potential trigger to go back to a gambling problem? Those that are abstained and in some form of recovery, vice versa, substances, etc. I've already mentioned on a couple occasions about the cocaine connection with gambling, which to me kind of makes sense, only because to my limited knowledge, cocaine, I'm going to defer to the experts in the room, is a stimulant. And gamblers got this thing, they can stay up without any sleep, which reminds me about the whole concept of comps. I've heard from many individuals it would have been cheaper for me to buy the room or rent the room for the night, because that room probably cost me $5,000. 4 similarities, again, things I've touched on: similarities of addictions, preoccupation, withdrawal, progression, and tolerance. Any comments? Biological dependence on the pleasure path, the whole neuroscience behind this, provide tension and relief. The psychosocial in nature, loss of spirituality, lies to cover up behavior. See, I don't know how accurate this is, and I don't know if the next 25 years, the third one, the stigma like alcohol 25 years ago, I don't know if this is ever going to be overcome in the gambling world. Although in the gambling addiction world, those that develop serious gambling disorders. And it starts out as something recreational. No one immediately develops a problem as a disordered gambler. But I make the analogy, it's the same way true. I know individuals that socially can drink alcohol and it never causes a problem. I believe that's what the doctor was referring to. We don't know what that answer is. Why do some have the ability, maybe not a poor choice of words, to be social with it, and when some, regardless of the substance or what you're talking about, just consumes their life? We don't know what that answer is. One thing I saw there was chasing the high. I have another individual I know that's getting treatment, and what I mean by that, these are the individuals I've met on my path, in my travels, that I've been able to refer to treatment, and we somewhat stay in touch about the concept of chasing wins, which I believe is greater than chasing your losses. This young man started gambling, took it to the next level probably about 5 years or so ago, and had tremendous amount of success where he had won like $50,000. 5 years later, he's still chasing that $50,000 that he won, to the point now he's in the hole for $500,000. I'm almost afraid to ask where the $500,000 is coming from. Does he still owe this money? Has he stole this money? Because you get a lot of people that think, oh, I'm not doing anything illegal. But you just went for $200,000 in your savings. You cashed in your 401k, not realizing the tax complications. Now you have a problem with the IRS. It just compounds. Yes?
I have a question about the debt aspect of it. When people call you and you get someone who says, I owe $500,000 or something really extreme, are there resources aside from psychological and physical or spiritual help? Like, are there financial resources to help people who've lost everything and then some?
To rebuild?
What can you possibly do for someone who is?
We have partnered with counseling and credit agencies throughout the state. We'll refer them to. It's not something that we do. We've given those resources to the 8 or 9 providers we've partnered with throughout the state. Because a lot of it, and it's a very a valuable question, because a lot of it, what we see is, and in my understanding, you just don't value money. You think that you do. You think that money is going to give you the ability to do whatever you want to do. There's the ego component to it also. So yes, credit, counseling, things like that, to try to get it. But a lot of times the money, when I talk about debt, unfortunately, and I touched on it earlier, they start to turn to criminality, whether it's white-collar crime. We try to help. We know people that are seeking treatment, trying to do the right thing, but you can't get around, and in no way can you justify criminality just because you have an addiction. I'm grateful that at least our society is starting to understand incarceration isn't a route, at least in the substance world. But there has to be consequences for your actions, and I firmly believe that. The line becomes very difficult. Hopefully I answered your question. Yes?
Frank, I just wanted to add to her question that back in the days when it was not legalized, there was help.
What was it legalized?
I was able to assist someone that had that issue, and because it was illegal, they were able to get that money back from the Caribbean, and they were internet gambling, they were able to get that money back because obviously it wasn't legal. But now that it's legal, I think some better off. Like if you lose that money, you lose that money, and it's sad. It's sad because unfortunately now this is legal, and once you lose it.
Well, the biggest difference, I think we all recognize, the difference between the legal gambling world and the illegal gambling world, for the most part, at least historically, is that even with these offshore sites, even though it's illegal, you have to put up the money. Okay, it's not like it was a lot of time. I mentioned the bookmakers where it was on credit. Although even in the legal world, the casinos, they have things, if you're considered the big whale, the high roller, they see you all the time, you're spending a lot of money, whether you're winning or losing, they extend you credit, they call them markers. Eventually, if you don't have the money, because the mindset of the person that develops a serious gambling disorder, if they go and they win $1 million, are they stopping? The mindset is, I'm going to turn that million into 2 million. They're ready to turn off the electric and gas tomorrow. I just got paid. I have the money to at least make some type of payment towards it, maybe not pay it current. Utility companies are going to work with you as long as you show some kind of effort. They don't want to turn off your electric. But I'll worry about that tomorrow. Let me go. Let me take my check today. I got $1,000, whatever the amount may be, because I'm going to make all this money and the world is going to be great. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Maybe if a person that doesn't have the disorder. Again, and the biggest difference, those that develop a serious gambling disorder can give them all the hair samples, the urine that they want, and there is no way of determining. Quite honestly, and sometimes I say this, I hope I'm just going to get a laugh because I'm just, there is no way that you folks would know. Hopefully this is halfway articulate. You learned a little bit today and welcome the opportunity of coming back again, but you didn't know that I was in Atlantic City and drove up. I'm telling people I live in Bergen County, which I do live in Bergen County. Doesn't necessarily mean I came from Bergen County. I could have been hanging out at the casino last night, won $50,000. How would you folks know? My wife would know. Sir.
Question, basically the biggest casino on the planet is Wall Street. Do you have people that,
Yes.
you get people that,
Yes. I'm aware of individuals that attend the 12-step fellowship program of Gamblers Anonymous, who their thing is not sports betting, casinos, or anything. It's stock market. There is distinction, specifically day traders is what I'm referring to. There is distinction between gambling in the market and investing in the market. I get this quite a bit. As a matter of fact, it came up yesterday in that same rehab program, the inpatient program up in Sunrise in Sussex I was at yesterday. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of literature on that. Also, I saw another hand. Yes.
Is it similar, can people become moderate gamblers? I mean,
Social gamblers, yes.
no, I mean, if they were addicted, like with alcohol, it's like, or any kind of drugs, can people go back to moderate use? No, usually not. Like, have you ever seen that, or does that ever happen, or?
Can you do that in the substance world, in the alcohol world?
No, not
Yeah.
usually.
I know I get a lot of pushback this, and as I mentioned, I'm not a therapist. First of all, in the 12-step fellowship world, they're of the opinion it's total abstinence. I know in the therapeutic world, at least, not that you can go back, there's the whole concept of harm reduction, maybe just as a tool. I know there's a lot of controversy behind that also, that you can possibly use it to ultimately get to that point. But, I should have maybe touched on it, but I breezed through it. The equation of the first drink to the first bet. Once you're abstinent, you really, because you don't have the ability. Unfortunately, if you're a disordered gambler, and to the best of my knowledge, whether similar to the substance world, you're going to be a compulsive, pathological, disordered gambler the rest of your life, and you have to develop the tools. I do also understand the concept of relapse is a potential form of recovery. And I'm of the opinion, anything that works to ultimately get you to that point, because the people that are hurt the most are the family members. You could create this illusion. Do you set out to hurt anybody? I don't believe so. But to a family structure, I give the analogy of, God forbid, a family member is diagnosed with a medical condition, whether it's cancer, diabetes, all the other stuff that are out there. The entire family structure is affected. But to answer your question, isn't that the $1 million question, though? That somehow you can, I'm going to use the word control, a word I really don't like, that you can control this and you could go from a disordered gambler back to a social recreational gambler. Maybe you can for long periods of time or stretches in between, but ultimately the obsession returns. Sir.
I was just going to say, it sounds like an idea, a theory, but it's not tested. So, and I say that having worked in different rehabs, and seeing people who are addicted to substances, and who've gone back and thought that they could do this in moderation after having lost all control previously, right? And it never works.
No.
It never works. So I don't know about gambling.
It's the same way. It really is. It's the same way. because inevitably it comes back. And again, I'll tie it in with the examples I gave you about that win, that initial win. Even if a person has been abstinent for X number of years, months, whatever it may be, and says, oh, I got this, I can do this. I'm gonna go with $100 and that's it. And if I lose the $100, then I'm done. And most times that would happen. The problem really becomes, in my experience, is when they turn that 100 into 1,000. Now it really sets them off. Yes?
There's a saying, what's fired together is wired together. And once you do that, neurobiologically, you're stimulating the dopamine response in your brain, which is actually changing the structure. I said structure, how it physically is, and the function of the brain in that area. And all addiction is basically the same type of stimulation. So once you go away from it and you go back and you do something a little bit, you're going to go back to that rewired thing that's in your brain, and it's going to catch on and will continue again. There's probably maybe an 1/18 of a percent the person who could probably do it occasionally, if at all. But they're really on the edge when they're doing that kind of stuff. So basically, doing stuff, alcohol, gambling, internet, whatever, it's really something that you have to stay away from, not to continue that rewiring and refiring of those neurons, which are producing the same chemicals that sugar does, that addiction does, that alcohol, that drugs affect, and you're going to re-stimulate that. The only way you can do that is by mindfulness, staying away from what you're doing, and with neuroplasticity, where we can change our brains. We can change our brains bad by becoming addicted. We always thought alcohol killed off our brain cells. We can make new brain cells and we can change them. But with neuroplasticity, we can become addicted, but we also with mindfulness, can become unaddicted by thinking about what we're doing, be conscious of what we're doing every day. So you really can't go back and do things a little bit. It just doesn't work.
I would agree. Thank you. I would definitely agree, and thank you for your sharing your knowledge and your insight. You know, protective factors ties in with the question the nice lady asked about, you know, credit and also financial security, supportive friends, having hopes. This ties into, and it's almost by coincidence listening to the doctor, and thank you again, you know, about changing, you devote so much time and energy to it that now it's not there. You know, you have to do something to replace that time.
And it's subconscious.
Right. And unfortunately, sometimes what happens, I see this, is that they pick up something else, something very productive. Work is very honorable, aside from the economic benefits for yourself and your family, working out at the gym. But you do it, again, it's the obsession. I hear many people that are in recovery that are going to the gym, but they're doing it almost, it seems like every hour. They're not giving their body a chance to recuperate from the workout. And they become so obsessive with it. You know, it's, right, exactly.
That's why you need to implement that the spirituality concept, which you did mention it, and when you realize in your first step, what are your manageability and accept that, and then you work with them.
Yeah. And again, triggers for gambling. One of the biggest challenges is availability of money and credit. Because in the world that we live in, right, wrong, or indifferent, you need these resources to survive, put food on the table. You move, you need a bedroom set, a living room set, and you might not have the cash, so you use your credit, which is what credit should be used for, not that you're taking advances or using your credit to put you in the hole so you can gamble. Comorbidity, this deals with, and again, a lot of things we've been talking, I didn't touch on it, about the whole public health concerns, the coexist, when I talked about comorbidity, co-occurring, it was between disordered gambling in the substance world, the alcohol misuse world. But here are some statistics comparing some of the mental health issues that we see, you know, depression. In the general public, it affects about 5%. Those that are, when they say gamblers, we need to change this, those that have developed a serious gambling disorder to meet the criteria, depression is about half to 3/4 prevalent. OCD, PTSD, which is a big issue. Me, myself, for the longest time, and a lot of people have this belief, when you heard PTSD, you thought it only dealt with the military. But it's not true. Again, I see the doctor nodding his head, and I know he's knowledgeable about these things. But you can just see how the occurrence in those that develop gambling disorders, the percentage is a lot higher than in the general public. And it's probably the same, I would venture, well, I know because I've seen the statistics, I can't regurgitate it, the same way with the correlation between mental health and the substance world. You know, what drives people? Is it a coincidence that Vegas has the highest suicide rate? One thing I should share, let's see if it's the last part of that. Those that develop a serious gambling disorder have the highest attempted suicide rate of all of the other addictions that we see. Yes, I get pushback on this. I said, what about this opioid epidemic? But to the best of my knowledge, that's classified as accidental death. I'm not naive. It pains me, but to think that a person might want to check out because they can't deal with the pain anymore in the substance world. But for the most part, my understanding is those are classified as accidental death. So the attempted suicide rate for those that develop a serious gambling disorder is the highest of all the addictions. So when I see the information that states, you know, Las Vegas is the highest suicide rate at least in the United States, it doesn't surprise me. And I recall just real quick, back on whenever it was, late September, early October, we had that mass shooting out in Las Vegas. Immediately, maybe because of the work that I'm in, my mind went to, wow, I wonder if this person has a gambling problem. Went to sleep and thought about it the next morning. I'm saying, I really hope not, because that's not necessarily the face that we want out there, if you understand what I'm trying to say. Now, I know there's still a lot of questions about that incident. God rest those 59 that were killed and myriads that were injured behind it, but it did come out this person was a gambler. Or did he have a gambling problem? It hasn't really come out. We do know that he was a night owl, meaning he slept during the daylight hours and gambled in the night hours. That ties to me, that there's the mental health component there that ties in. And again, just because you win doesn't necessarily mean you don't have a problem. Although I will put in the years I've been in this field, I've never met an individual who said, I just won $1 million, but I need treatment. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. I know my time is up. Any parting questions? You know, just real quick, again, as I touched on earlier, most of these things I know you have copies of. I've touched on them, maybe not in the order. Our goal is, at least in those in the substance and alcohol world that deal with treatment, and again, I don't want to just, only because Seabrook is here, but I know there's many other agencies that have incorporated. I know through our efforts, and I'm grateful to the Department of Corrections, and the gentleman's name is the chief psychiatrist, his name is Dr. Caldani with the New Jersey Department of Corrections, that now all of those that have been convicted of crimes and have to become incarcerated for whatever period of time, part of their intake and their assessment process. There are questions about gambling, because as I mentioned, gambling is pervasive in the in the correctional system. And what always amazes me is that we'll say if this individual was a gambler on the street and was playing with tens of thousands of dollars, now he gets, or she gets into the correctional system. They are playing with basically penalty stamps. I know that not cigarettes. Well, they were outlawed 2 decades ago. To the best of my knowledge, doesn't mean that doesn't take place. Again, I don't know anything. But as you see, I'm still amazed. No matter how many time, but we are making traction in the world. Here is some things, some additional resources, the DSM-5, as I touched on, the Southwest Gambling Screening. Gamblers Anonymous has 20 questions that they ask new members that attend the meetings. And just real quick, just a quick history for those that may not be aware. Chronologically, AA was formed in the 30s, NA in the 40s, Gamblers Anonymous in the 50s. Today's probably somewhere of 10 to a dozen self-help groups, Shoppers Anonymous, hoarders, whatever they may be. I bring that up only because the basic concept or the outline, like Overeaters Anonymous, I'm aware, still use AA literature. They were the forerunners. Gamblers Anonymous started that way, and over the years have tweaked their information. And there are meetings throughout the world. Thank you, folks. Oh, I'm sorry, question.
Are there a lot of Gambler Anonymous groups in New Jersey?
I want to say off the top of my head, last I heard, I think there are 60 some odd meetings in the state.
60?
Yeah, there are meetings every day, at least a meeting, but they're nowhere near the meetings, or the membership is nowhere near, for example, what NA or NA is. But then again, I'm of the opinion there should be thousands in the meetings, but what do I know? There are meetings, and if you go to gamblersanonymous.org, as a matter of fact, if you go to 800gambler.org, we have a link, an interactive link where you can just put like your zip code in or something, and you can find a meeting closest to you. And the other phenomenon, oh, I don't want to drive to that far. 20 minutes is too long. Oh, but when you were going to the track and you were traveling 2 hours to go to the casino, that wasn't an issue, right? You're trying to help yourself here. I hear that so much. Yes.
And also there's help for the families.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. Oh, really?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. Gam-Anon, analogous to Al-Anon in the AA world, which is for the family members, significant others. Although there are, I don't believe there are that many in New Jersey, there are Gamble Anonymous meetings referred to as open meetings. And what that means is anyone from the general public can go, as opposed to a closed meeting where only the individual that has the gambling problem should be attending. And Gam-Anon is even fewer members. I don't know, but the number of meetings in Gam-Anon, thank you for reminding me, because that's a valuable resource also. And it's attended, as I said, by the significant, sometimes it's parents about their children, or spouses, significant others. I know we live in a world, whatever floats people's boat is perfectly fine with me, as long as you're getting the help that you need. Other questions? Again, I left my business cards. You have any questions, shoot me an email, and we'll get the response. But all this information is easily accessible on the internet. Thank you.